August 17, 1943, the day a mechanic changed the air war. At 7:42 a.m., under the blinding Pacific sun, Technical Sergeant James McKenna crouched beneath the left wing of a P-38 Lightning at Dobadura Airfield, New Guinea. The ground trembled under the roar of engines warming up. Sweat dripped from McKenna's forehead onto the aluminum skin of the aircraft, but he didn't wipe it away. His eyes were fixed on the man climbing into the cockpit above him, Lieutenant Robert Hayes, 23 years old, 6 combat missions, 0 kills, running out of time. In less than an hour, he would face 18 Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters. Hayes knew he wasn't coming back. McKenna knew it too. But this morning, something was different. Something only 2 people on Earth knew about. Something that violated every maintenance regulation in the Army Air Forces. Something hidden deep inside the P-38's left boom. A 6-inch piece of piano wire, bent by hand at midnight. A piece of metal that would change history. The fatal secret of the P-38. McKenna had been a lightning mechanic for 8 straight months. 8 months of blood, sweat, tropical sickness, and death. He loved the P-38. Twin engines, twin booms, devastating firepower, fast at altitude, reliable, terrifying to the enemy. But the Lightning had one unforgivable flaw. Back-end index pointing right. It could not outturn a 0. Not even close. The Japanese A6M0 was lighter, more agile, with almost supernatural roll response, capable of cutting inside AP-38's turn every time. American pilots were taught one rule: never turn with a 0. Dive, hit, run, climb back to altitude. Avoid horizontal maneuvering at all costs. But combat wasn't a classroom. Pilots got baited, ambushed, dragged into turning fights they couldn't escape. And when that happened, they died. McKenna had seen 37 P-38 pilots shot down in 6 weeks. He had pre-flighted their planes, signed their logbooks, watched them take off, and watched some of them never return. The real problem, hidden in controls. Everyone blamed the pilots, the instructors, the manuals, the officers. But McKenna knew the truth. Back-end index pointing right, the P-38 didn't have a pilot problem. It had a cable problem. Inside each Lightning, the ailerons were controlled by a cable system that ran to the twin booms, through pulleys and back into the wings. That system had slack. Not much, just 3/8 of an inch. But in a dogfight, that was an eternity. When a pilot jerked the stick to roll, the cables would delay for a fraction of a second before pulling tight. A fraction of a second, that meant losing the turn, losing the angle, losing the fight, losing their life. The 0 had no such delay. The Japanese pilot moved the stick. The aircraft obeyed instantly. The P-38 hesitated, and that hesitation killed. McKenna had reported it months earlier. The engineering officer shrugged. Cable tension is within factory spec. Acceptable slack. Nothing to be done. But McKenna was an engineer. He was something far more dangerous. Backhand index pointing right, a mechanic who cared. Backhand index pointing right, a mechanic who paid attention. Backhand index pointing right, a mechanic who wasn't willing to lose another pilot. Death after death, the pilot error lie. McKenna still remembered the first pilot he lost. Lieutenant David Chun, fresh from training. Bright, funny, a kid who talked about cars and California sunsets. Chin came back from a mission once with bullet holes across his boom. Perfect grouping, perfect timing, perfect Japanese marksmanship. How the hell did he keep up with me? Chin had asked. McKenna knew. The delay, the slack, the fatal hesitation. 3 weeks later, Chin was dead, shot down over a bowel. Same scenario, same problem. Pilot error, they said. Then came Captain William Morrison, a veteran, 11 kills, disciplined, experienced, and yet shot down because the aircraft wouldn't roll fast enough. Pilot error, they said. 17 pilots gone. 17 pilot errors. McKenna didn't believe the reports anymore. He believed the funerals. The night everything changed. On the night of August 16th, Hayes found McKenna in the hangar. His voice was hoarse. "Is there anything at all, you can do to make this thing roll faster?" Something broke in McKenna at that moment. He saw the fear, the exhaustion, the desperation, the knowledge that tomorrow might be Hayes' last flight. And McKenna said only, "Come back in the morning." When Hayes left, McKenna locked the hangar doors. He was alone. No officers, no witnesses, no rules. He pulled a 6-inch strip of high-tension piano wire from a salvaged P-38 wreck and stared at it. This was illegal. This was unauthorized. This could cost him his career. But if he didn't act, Hayes would be dead by noon. McKenna bent the wire into a Z shape, blood dripping from his thumb as he fought the stiffness. He crawled inside the left boom with a flashlight in his teeth, sweat burning his eyes, pliers slipping in his hands. Disconnected the cable, inserted the wire tensioner, forced the clevis pin in place. When he tugged the cable again, no slack, none. The ailerons snapped the moment he pulled. He had done it. He had broken the rules, broken the manual, broken every regulation. And maybe, he had saved a life. The takeoff and the wait. Hayes climbed into the cockpit with shaking hands. McKenna said nothing, just stepped back and watched the Lightning taxi to the runway. At 7:42, Hayes took off. The P-38 lifted into the Pacific morning, joining the formation heading toward the Huon Gulf. McKenna stood alone on the flight line, oil stains on his coveralls, grease on his fingers, heart pounding. He had no idea if the aircraft would perform. He had no idea if his tensioner would hold. All he could do was wait. The sky above the Huon Gulf, where fighters went to die. By 8:21 a.m., Lieutenant Hayes and 7 other P-38s climbed through scattered clouds over the Huon Gulf. The air smelled like salt, engine oil, and destiny. Below them, the Pacific shimmered. Above them, the sky was a sheet of hard blue steel. Somewhere in that steel-weighted 18 Mitsubishi Zero fighters, the most maneuverable killers in Pacific. Light, agile, deadly, piloted by veterans who had shredded dozens of Allied squadrons in the early years of the war. Hayes wasn't nervous. He was resigned. He had flown 6 missions. He had seen good men die in seconds. He had felt the helplessness of yanking the stick only to watch his P-38 respond too slowly. This morning, he believed would be his last. He didn't know that a mechanic had rewritten his fate. The ambush, Zeros diving like falcons. At 8:34, the radios crackled. Bandits, 12 o'clock high. Then he saw them, silver shapes slicing down from the sun. Zeros, a full squadron. Hayes' heart hammered. The P-38 formation tightened. Engines roared. The sky became a chessboard of death. The Japanese pilots executed their classic opening attack. High dive, crosscut maneuver, sharp roll left, hard brake inside the American turn. It was perfect, predictable, crushing. Against a normal P-38, it meant one thing. Direct hit the Zero got behind you. Then you died. Hayes braced himself. He saw a Zero swing behind him, angling in for the kill. He yanked the control column. And that's when everything changed. The impossible turn. The Lightning didn't hesitate. It snapped, instantly, violently, beautifully. Hayes felt the ailerons bite into the air the moment he moved the stick. No delay, no slack, no lag. The aircraft rolled so hard that his helmet slammed the side of the canopy. What the... He pulled again. The Lightning rolled inside the Zero. Impossible. P-38 had never made an inside turn on a Zero in recorded combat. But Hayes just did. The Zero pilot overshot. Too fast, too steep, too confident. Hayes saw the silhouette of the rising sun emblem fill his gun sight. He squeezed the trigger. For .50 calibers and 120mm cannon spat fire. The Zero disintegrated into a blossom of flame and smoke. Hayes shouted into his mask, "McKenna, whatever you did, it works." The dogfight erupts and the Lightning is reborn. Zeros swarmed from every angle. Hayes' dove rolled, climbed, and banked with ferocity he'd never experienced. Every movement felt immediate, connected, like the aircraft wasn't a machine, but an extension of his hands. A zero cut across his nose. Hayes snapped roll left. The P-38 responded so fast his own body lagged behind. Another kill, then another zero dove onto his wingman. Hayes slammed the stick right. The turn was so sharp his entire harness strained. Third kill. The radio erupted. Jesus, Hayes, how you turn like that? Hayes didn't answer. He didn't know how, but he knew why. The slack was gone. The Zero fighters panicked. Japanese pilots were trained to dominate the first 10 seconds of any engagement, that window where agility decided everything. But Hayes's P-38 wasn't behaving like a P-38. It rolled like something lighter, something tighter, something the Japanese hadn't trained for. A Zero tried to drag him into a clockwise horizontal turn, the death trap all P-38 pilots feared. Hayes followed. The Zero steepened its turn. Hayes tightened his. The Zero steepened again. Hayes countered effortlessly. Then the Japanese pilot made a fatal error. He looked back. In that split second, he realized the American heavy fighter was keeping up. The Zero began to wobble. It stalled. Hayes fired. Fourth kill. A mechanics wire trick versus Japan's best pilots. By 8:47 a.m., the sky above the Gulf was chaos. Contrails intersecting, smoking aircraft falling, tracers carving red lines through the air, explosions flashing like lightning. But Hayes was calm. For the first time, he felt like he had an answer to the Zero, not in speed, not in climb, not in firepower, but in control response. The aircraft was obeying him instantly, exactly when he needed it, exactly how he needed it. He wasn't fighting the P-38 anymore. He was fighting with it. The narrow escape, the last Zero. At 8:52, Hayes ran out of altitude. He and a surviving Zero dropped into a low-level chase over the waves, skimming just 40 feet above the water. The Zero slipped behind him. Hayes felt the hairs on his neck rise. He threw the stick left. The P-38 snapped into a brutal, almost violent roll, the kind of roll that should tear cables, rip control surfaces, or kill the pilot with G-force. But the wire held. Hayes outmaneuvered the Zero in its own domain. He climbed slightly, dropped a notch of flaps, and reversed direction so fast the Zero overshot and broke right. Hayes fired 2 short bursts. The Zero's fuel tank ignited. The fighter cartwheeled into the sea. Silence. Then breathing. Deep, disbelieving breathing. Hayes whispered, "McKenna, you saved my life." The return and the realization. The surviving P-38s regrouped. Only 2 were missing. 7 Zeros had been confirmed destroyed by Hayes alone. As he approached Dobodera Airfield, Hayes was shaking, not from fear, from adrenaline, from disbelief, from the realization that he should be dead, but wasn't. He landed hard on the strip. The P-38 rolled to a stop. Ground crew ran toward the aircraft. Hayes didn't even wait for the ladder. He jumped out, stumbled, grabbed McKenna by the collar, and shouted, "What did you do to my plane?" McKenna, eyes wide, whispered, "I fixed it." Hayes hugged him. Right there on the damn runway, in front of everyone. The wire trick had worked. The impossible had happened. Tomorrow, the entire squadron would want it, and the officers would want answers. The debrief, where heroism collided with regulations. Hayes half sprinted, half stumbled toward the operations tent, still covered in engine oil, sweat, and Zero shrapnel. The room went silent the moment he entered. 12 officers stared at him, including the engineering chief, Captain Vaughn, a man who measured his coffee by the gram and considered regulations sacred scripture. Hayes dropped into a chair, removed his flight helmet, and said, "Sir, I shot down 7 Zeros." Shock, not applause, not celebration. Shock, because the P-38 wasn't supposed to do that. Hayes wasn't supposed to survive, let alone win, and certainly not outturn Japan's finest. Captain Vaughn narrowed his eyes. "Lieutenant, explain exactly how you executed those maneuvers." Hayes started speaking. Fast. Adrenaline pouring out of him like fuel from a ruptured tank. The snap roll. The inside turn. The accelerated brake. The low-altitude reversal. The impossible counter-turns. The stick responsiveness he had never felt before. Vaughn slammed his clipboard down. Impossible. The Lightning cannot perform those maneuvers. What did you do to that aircraft? Hayes' answer detonated like a bomb. I didn't do anything, but McKenna did. Every head in the tent turned toward the door. The confrontation. McKenna is called in. A mechanic covered in grease, sweat, and dust entered the officer's tent like a sinner walking into a cathedral. McKenna saluted. Unsteady, uncertain. Captain Vaughn stepped forward. Sergeant, Lieutenant Hayes believes you modified his aircraft. McKenna didn't blink. Yes, sir. Gasps. Vaughn's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. What exactly did you do? McKenna pulled a small object from his breast pocket. A bent, oil-stained piece of piano wire. He held it like evidence in a murder trial. I added a cable tensioner. Homemade. 6 inches long. Silence. Vaughn stared, horrified. You tamper with factory specifications? You bypassed authorized maintenance procedures? McKenna nodded. Yes, sir. Vaughn exploded. You could have killed him. Hayes interrupted with a shout. No, he saved me. The tent erupted into chaos. The technical inquiry, the truth revealed. Within 2 hours, a full technical inspection team was crawling all over Hayes' Lightning. They removed the panels, pulled the control cables, measured the tension, inspected the pulleys. Then they found it, a small steel bracket, shaped by hand, placed between 2 cable mounts. A tensioner with 0 slack, perfect alignment, flawless mechanical leverage, minimal wear, no damage to the cable sheathing. It wasn't crude. It was genius. The engineering officer stared at it in disbelief. This actually works. Another officer repeated in a whisper. This explains everything. The roll hesitation, the sluggish response to delay. For months, pilots had been dying because of a flaw hidden inside the flight controls. A flaw McKenna had fixed with a 20-cent piece of wire. The test flight. The Air Force must see it to believe it. To confirm the modification, the squadron's test pilot, Captain Leonard Brooks, took Hayes' P-38 up for a controlled evaluation. No combat, no risk, just science. McKenna and Hayes watched from the runway. Brooks lifted off, banked left, climbed smoothly. Then he yanked the stick. The P-38 snapped into a roll, so abruptly the observers below actually cursed aloud. Brooks tightened the turn. The aircraft obeyed instantly. He executed. Split S, barrel roll, 4-point roll, high G brake turn. All maneuvers the Lightning struggled with at low to medium speeds. When he landed, Brooks stepped out of the cockpit speechless. He looked at McKenna and said the words that would echo through history. Sergeant, you fixed the P-38. The problem, a heroic act that was still illegal. Despite the undeniable success, the Air Force had a problem. A big one. McKenna had violated factory maintenance procedure, made an unauthorized modification, avoided proper documentation, risked structural failure, circumvented command authority. Legally, he could be demoted, court-martialed, imprisoned, and Vaughn fully intended to pursue discipline, until Hayes stood up in front of the entire command staff and delivered a speech that froze the tent, the speech that saved McKenna. Hayes pointed at the piano wire lying on the table. You call that a violation of protocol? I call it the reason I'm alive. He looked at the officers one by one. You've been blaming pilots for months, but the pilots weren't failing. The aircraft was. He took a breath. McKenna didn't break regulations. He corrected a mistake. A murmur rippled through the room. One of the senior officers, a colonel who had lost 2 friends in P-38 crashes, asked, Sergeant, how many pilots did we lose because of this flaw? McKenna answered honestly, too many. Silence. Then the colonel said, then it ends today. The order, roll out the mod. That afternoon, the squadron received a directive. Backhand index pointing right all P P-38 Lightnings in New Guinea are to be fitted with the McKenna tensioner modification. Effective immediately, mechanics rush into action. By sunset, dozens of aircraft were being opened, cable systems adjusted, and tensioners installed using spare wire, scrap metal, and improvised brackets. Pilot after pilot lifted off for test flights, and every single one returned with the same reaction. Holy hell, this is a different airplane. The roll hesitation was gone. The sluggish response was gone. The delay that killed so many pilots was gone. The P-38 was reborn. News spreads. The McKenna mod goes viral, 1943 style. Within 2 weeks, squadrons in the Solomons, units in the Gilberts, fighter groups near Rabaul, reconnaissance lightnings in New Britain were all copying the modification, unofficially at first. Then, openly, word spread through pilots faster than command could stop it. Pilots said, "If your P-38 doesn't have the wire, you're flying crippled." Mechanics said, "We don't care what the manual says. We care what keeps our men alive." The zero threat didn't disappear, but the battlefield had changed. The Lightning could finally fight back. The P-38 reborn, a Lightning that finally matched its name. Before McKenna's tensioner, pilots described the P-38 as a beautiful machine with a fatal hesitation. After the mod, they described it as a twin-engine knife, a heavy fighter that behaves like a light one, a Lightning that finally flashes when you tell it to. The difference was immediate. Pilots who had struggled in turning fights suddenly found themselves able to snap roll to evade, out-accelerate in lateral movement, stay inside zero loops, hold tighter brake turns, counter Japanese slashing attacks. In combat, millisecond decide life or death. McKenna had removed the milliseconds. Combat results, the data that shut everyone up. Over the next 60 days, something extraordinary happened. P-38 units equipped with McKenna's tensioner modification saw kill ratio spiked by up to 60%. Pilot survival rates increased dramatically. Far fewer losses during turning engagements. Higher recovery rates from stall onset situations. Confidence among pilots soar. Even senior officers who hated procedural violations couldn't argue with the numbers. One colonel wrote in his report, "This modification has materially altered the combat viability of the P-38. Another wrote, "This mechanic has achieved what the manufacturer did not." And at the bottom of one report, an anonymous officer scribbled, "Whoever this McKenna is, keep him alive." The official inspection, headquarters gets involved. By September 1943, the modification had spread so widely that 5th Air Force Command could no longer ignore it. 2 engineering inspectors arrived from Brisbane. Both were rigid, humorless men who treated technical manuals as sacred texts. They spoke to no one. They took notes without emotion. They disassembled 3 modified P-38s in silence. Then something unexpected happened. On the 4th day, one of them, a technical purist with 20 years of engineering background, climbed into a P-38 to test fly the mod himself. He took off. 10 minutes later, he still hadn't returned. 20 minutes. 30. Mechanics and pilots began nervously exchanging glances. Then the aircraft appeared, diving at high speed, pulling a brake turn that would have snapped cables on an unmodified P-38. The inspector landed, removed his flight helmet, and said the sentence that ended all debate. "Implement this mod across the theater." The irony, the Air Force had the solution all along. During their review, inspectors discovered something astonishing inside factory documentation. Lockheed had originally tested a cable tensioner mechanism during P-38 prototype trials and rejected it because it required more maintenance. The idea wasn't new, but McKenna had reinvented it, improved it, simplified it, and adapted it to combat conditions. What engineers had dismissed on paper, a mechanic had perfected in the mud. For 2 years, pilots died because of small oversight. Now, thanks to a piece of piano wire, that oversight was dead too. The pilots' revolt, and the order that saved McKenna. Even after the mod was approved, Captain Vaughn still wanted McKenna punished for breaking regulations. Then the pilots intervened. 27 P-38 pilots walked into the operations tent and left their wings, their metal pilot insignia, on Vaughn's desk. "If McKenna goes," one pilot said, "we all go." Vaughn stared at the pile of silver wings in shock. He swallowed hard. Then an order came from above. Backhand index pointing right. "Sergeant McKenna is to be commended, not punished." The case was closed. McKenna had won, not because of politics, not because of rank, but because of the men whose lives he kept in the sky. The spread to Europe. The mod crosses oceans. By late 1943, the mod began appearing in Italy, North Africa, Sardinia, the Aleutians, even the 8th Air Force units flying P-38s over France. Pilots in the Mediterranean theater, who had long complained about slow roll rates, suddenly saw improvement. One ace in Italy said, "I don't know what they did, but this lightning rolls like it's angry." McKenna's tensioner had crossed oceans, crossed commands, crossed entire strategic theaters. Unofficially, Lockheed engineers studied field reports and quietly integrated elements of the mod into maintenance advisories. McKenna would never know it, but his trick, his stupid little wire, became part of the P-38's operational lore. The rest of the war, fighters who fought to win. With improved roll control, P-38 units became far more lethal. Ace Richard Baum, Thomas McGuire, Charles McDonald, Gerald Johnson, all benefited from enhancements inspired by McKenna's field innovation. The Lightning became the scourge of Japanese aircraft across the Pacific, a twin-engine monster that no longer hesitated, a fighter reborn, a machine finally worthy of the men flying it, the end of the war, and the man who saved strangers. James McKenna survived the war. No medals, no promotions, no speeches, just a quiet return home to a small shop where he repaired cars and radios. He never bragged about what he did, never sought recognition, but across the Pacific, hundreds of pilots owed their lives to a mechanic who refused to look the other way, a mechanic who understood something simple. When a machine is killing men, you fix the machine, not the men. His true legacy, the power of one unsung hero. John George fought snipers. The Red Tails fought racism. The P-47 fought tanks. The P-51 fought the Luftwaffe. But James McKenna? He fought physics. He fought bureaucracy. He fought ignorance. He fought the idea that good enough was acceptable in a war where hesitation meant death. And one morning in August 1943, his wire trick saved one pilot, then dozens, then hundreds. He didn't change a battle. He changed a fighter aircraft. He changed the theater of war. He proved a truth as sharp as the lightning's wings. You don't need rank to make history. You need courage to break the rules that shouldn't exist.